phase that we want to talk about is interphase. The part of a cell's life where it's not really dividing or it's doing whatever it does for a living. Okay, if it's a muscle cell, well, it's contracting. If it's a bone cell, it could be an osteoblast, which means it's building more bone, or an osteoclast, which means it's breaking down bone, or it could be an osteocyte, which is a plain Jane old bone cell. Okay? Storing calcium for you for later. Interphase has 3 stages, and they're called G1, S, and G2. And these are important, and you'll see why in a minute. So as the cell is doing whatever it normally does. So whenever a cell is doing whatever it normally does, it's still kind of like you. You're doing what you normally do, but certain things are going on with you. Some of you are still growing. Okay? For sure your hair is growing. Alright, so there are things happening to you that happen no matter what. Like, and so muscle is a bad example, and you'll see why in a minute. In a cell like, let's say in the lining of your intestine, if that cell is doing whatever it does, let's say it secretes fluid, and we'll look at some of these later, onto the surface of your intestine, it's still getting ready to divide. Okay? And it's going through these 3 stages. I want to talk about these 3 stages because they're kind of important as far as cancer goes. First one is called G1, and just the reason it's called G is it means gap. First gap, which means like if you were looking at this on a timeline. During G1 is when a cell is growing and making more organelles, like mitochondria and ribosomes, and things like that. Okay, if it's a muscle cell, it makes more mitochondria. At this phase, and I'm going to show you a timeline of this in a minute, there's what's called a checkpoint here. As the cell is growing, it gets to a certain point where it's either going to stop growing, or it gets a chemical signal and it keeps growing. I'll show you. A checkpoint means, okay, the cell is growing, it's making more organelles, and then it's going to stop. And it will stay at the same size and do what it does unless it's told to divide. If it doesn't get the signal, if it does not, so no signal, it enters what's called G0 phase, no growth. Most human cells are in this phase right now. As you're sitting here, most of your cells are just not growing, they're just doing whatever they do. Some cells, human muscle cells and nerve cells, are permanently in this phase. Good question. Solve that problem, make millions and millions and millions of dollars. For the sake of people watching this at home, Jenna Grimm asked why. S just stands for the replication or the creation of new DNA. There's nothing really to say about that, except that. G2 literally stands for second growth, or second gap, I mean. And here, there is another checkpoint, at which now the cell is all ready to divide. It's created its DNA, it's ready to go, but it needs another signal to divide. question by Shannon was, how are the signals given? Well, let me give you an example of one. Human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is normally secreted by the brain up until, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 years after puberty. We're not sure why it stops being. We're not sure why it starts at a certain time. But it's secreted by the brain, and that provides a chemical signal to pretty much all of your cells to divide. So your bones grow, your muscles grow, pretty much everything in you grows. Human growth hormone provides a chemical signal for the cell division to go, just go. It could be that, let's say, you cut yourself, you cut your skin open. Okay, and so those cells now have to grow faster than the other cells, right, to cover the hole. So those cells will get a chemical signal from the brain or sometimes from the cells around it in the area that say, okay, we need to divide to fill this in. That's the simplest way I can tell you. Sometimes it's in the cell itself. There's a gene that says, all right, you got to divide, and it makes the cell divide. I don't want to get too complicated with genetics. That's why I don't really want to, Okay, so here's the idea. If you look at a cell life cycle, I'm going to draw a circle. Okay? And I'm going to use another color that shows up. Any color would be a good selection here. We'll use white. This is the total. Okay, this part here that I'm going to hash in right now is interphase. This part here is mitosis. This little part. Okay, so cells divides. Mitosis ends here, and the cell's new life of interphase starts. It goes along, goes along, goes along, goes along, growing, 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 and then comes what we call the G1 checkpoint. It's going to stop growing and everything unless it's given a signal to keep going. Then it's going to divide its DNA and go through G2, and then right here, right before mitosis starts, is the last checkpoint. Okay? So the cell's all ready to go, and it's either told to keep dividing, go ahead and divide, or it's not going to go ahead and divide. And a lot of times we think of this as being, well, it's the cell itself decides to divide or not, and cells don't work that way. The DNA within the cell tells it to divide or not. The nucleus, or sometimes it's an outside signal. For example, you can get up and leave at any time. But pretty much when the bell rings, that's your signal to get up and go. Okay? The cell will go and divide, not divide, divide, not divide right here, and it gets the bell rings, boop, divide. Does that make any sense? What was the cell doing? Whatever it does for a living. So if it's a bone cell, it's storing calcium, doing cell respiration and other things to keep itself alive. If it's we'll look at some different tissues the week after next, so then we can talk a little bit more about that actually. There are about 250 different kinds of cells. No, sorry, 220 different kinds of cells. So if it's a white blood cell, it's out hunting disease. Mitosis. How long does a cell live? Essentially, depends on what it is. A nerve cell can sit and not divide forever, essentially, for your whole life. So you could have nerve cells in your brain right now that have been there since you first built it, and they'll be there until you die. And you'll have some cells, like in your skin, that are flaking off and going off into the air, and you're putting new ones on all the time. So it depends on where it is in its job, essentially. Nerve and muscle cells, they're pretty much the same forever. We do know this. 49 is the magic number. Do you know what that magic number is? How many times a cell will divide? That's just for fun information. Cell divides 49 times, and that's it. As far as we know. As far as we know. So when it gets to 50, okay, doesn't divide, just dies. Okay, and you're like, well, hold on now, let me think of this conceptually then. So the very first cell I had, the very first cell that was you, is no longer around. Because it divided way more than 49 times. If we can get cells to divide more than this, what have we achieved? Immortality! If you can get a cell, see, here's the theory. The theory is that one of the reasons behind aging is more and more of our cells are reaching that total. So why is my skin getting wrinkly? Because my cells that have to divide to keep it going in here aren't all surviving. The cells that help my stretchy tissues spring back and then repair itself aren't dividing anymore as often because some of them aren't going to divide again. Some cells die and they don't get remade. And so that's one of the theories behind aging is that if you can figure out how to increase the number of that, you can increase the lifespan. It's a theory. We'll leave it at that. Yes, ma'am. Cassie. The question is, I think this is important just for information. How do you know how many times a cell is divided? Okay. Inside of a cell are things called chromosomes, right? At the end of each chromosome, each chromosome has a little cap on it called a telomere, and you don't need to know this, but I'm going to tell, unless you're in AP biology and we'll read about it later. Every division, that gets a little shorter. So if you could take a really powerful microscope and look at the chromosomes of a cell, new cells will have a really long cap, and old cells will have a really short cap. That's essentially it. Why is that? We have no idea. We know that it has something to do with aging, though. Because cells, if they can make those cells not shorten those, they live longer and they divide more. That would be the fountain of life, fountain of youth drug. You could discover it. And people have tried it. Because you can make us that. I don't know why. Money seems to drive pretty much everything. About that. Not necessarily. Some people